Hi, this is Bruce Whipple, and welcome to the Business Acquisition Podcast. This is where we talk about how to acquire an already profitable business rather than build one from scratch. In the past 25 years, I've acquired several businesses, and I've also built several businesses from scratch. And I can tell you that it's a lot easier to do the former rather than the latter. You may know me from my association with Dan Peña, who I've worked with and been partners with for more than 25 years. Dan is gracious enough to mention me quite often in his videos, and it's been a real pleasure working with Dan, and one of the few people that I call a true friend. And actually, we've worked on many acquisitions together as well. And even though I said it was easier to acquire a business rather than build one from scratch, that doesn't necessarily mean it's easy. I often say that QLA is simple, but please don't make the mistake of thinking that simple is the same thing as easy. It still requires hard work. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is one of the biggest obstacles that prevents a lot of people who want to acquire a business from actually doing so. And that is your own brain. Of course, you need a plan. Of course, you need to work that plan. But you need to believe that you can actually achieve it. I remember back in the 1990s, I attended a seminar, and there was a speaker who was talking about just that, motivation, getting things done, how the mindset is so important in doing that. And he talked about the Twin Towers, and he said, imagine that I'm at the top of one of the Twin Towers, and you're at the top of the other Twin Tower. And it's a rainy day, it's a windy day, and I've got a plank between those two. And he said, how many would cross that plank from where you are over to where I am for $100? Well, of course, nobody said they would. $1,000, same thing. $100,000, you got a couple of crazy people that raised their hand. $1 million, you got a few more people. But then he asked the question, how many in this room are parents? And a bunch of people put their hands up. And he said, okay, so imagine now that you're on one side, I'm on the other side, and I'm dangling your child over the edge of the Twin Towers. How many then would cross that plank? And it was amazing to watch the audience. The people that were parents, their faces steeled, they raised their hand, and all of a sudden they weren't thinking about, well, it's windy, it's rainy, I could get knocked off and fall down to the pavement below. All they were focused on was getting across that plank and saving their child, and they knew some way, somehow, they would get across. And so they didn't think about failure. They didn't think about the limitations they had or what the circumstances was. They were just laser being focused on getting that job done. And I think it's a great example of what it requires to actually go through this process. You really need to focus on the end result and then the right tools to do what you want to accomplish. Most people, unfortunately, listen to the people around them. And oftentimes those people are people who have not done what you want to accomplish. And Jim Rohn said, you will become the composite of the 5 people that you hang around with the most. So pick those people carefully. It was interesting. That also applies to what your income is as well. So you might want to pick some successful people, some wealthy people, and test that theory. But it's interesting when you think about the mindset. A great example, I think, of that is Roger Bannister. He was the first person to run the sub 4-minute mile, and he did that back in, I believe it was 1954. Up until that point, people thought it was impossible. That they didn't think that the human body was capable of running a sub 4-minute mile. But he did it, and 46 days later, John Landy ran a sub-minute mile as well. Within the next year, 3 runners in the same race ran a sub 4-minute mile. And in the following half century, more than 1,000 people broke the 4-minute mile mark. So what was different? Human body wasn't different. Equipment wasn't different. You just needed to have a pair of shorts and a pair of running shoes. What was different was the actual belief that they could do it. They saw somebody do it, and that gave them the confidence that if they can do it, I can do it. And that's why it's so important to follow a plan that's actually generated the results that you want to achieve. And if you take a look at QLA, and there's some methodology that Dan Peña created back in, actually before I met him in 1993. That methodology since 1993 has been responsible for the creation of more than $50 billion in wealth. And personally, since 1993, working with the clients and my own businesses, I've created more than $2 billion in cumulative wealth as well. So there's no question, just like the 4-minute mile, there's no question, at least in my mind, that this methodology works if you work it. But please don't make the mistake of thinking that simple, and the QLA plan is actually pretty simple, is the same as easy. Now, Napoleon Hill said it pretty well in just a few words. He said, conceive it, believe it, and achieve it. So when you think about that, most people think about their limitations. They say, well, I don't know how I'd acquire a business. I don't have any money, really. I don't have any business experience. I don't have any track record. That may all be true. But one of the first steps in QLA is to understand that, okay, if you have those limitations or lack of experience or lack of track record or lack of money, that you need to give yourself an ability to overcome that. And the dream team does just that. And what I mean by the dream team is to surround yourself with people who have been there and done that. So let's take a look at how that first discussion might go. And that is that you realize you've got those limitations. You want to augment your lack of experience with people who have that experience. So when you reach out to somebody who's been there, done that, and you explain what it is you want to do, and hopefully what you want to do is something that's either new or different, so that they can say, oh, okay, I see what you're going to do. I see why you're going to acquire those businesses, and I see what you're going to do better or different than people in that industry do today. They oftentimes say, well, you don't have any capital, I would guess. You don't have any business experience, and you don't have any track record of doing mergers and acquisitions. So why in the world would I ever want to do anything with you? Well, that's a pretty good question, actually. And a lot of times when I talk to people and I ask them that question, mentees, they say, well, I'd explain that I'm going to work harder. Nobody's going to work as hard as I am. I would never quit, kind of all the trite things that you hear. But I said to most of them, a better way to handle it is to say, you're exactly right, Mr. Dream Team Prospect. I don't have much capital. I don't have any real business experience or any real track record of acquiring mergers and acquisitions and businesses through that process. But you know what I do have, and that's an understanding that I'm smart enough to understand that. And that's why I'm talking to you, and that's why I want to surround myself with people who have been there and done that. And that does a couple of things. One, it is a subtle compliment to the person you're talking to that you consider them to be a been there and done that person. And a lot of times what I hear from people who use that technique is that the person on the other end said, actually, that makes a lot of sense. I wish I was that smart at 25 years old or whatever the age is. So owning that lack, figuring out a plan by which you're going to get those things taken care of, and a dream team is just one of the pieces in that process. It's amazing how you can turn that mindset around to, I don't have these things, so I can't do it, to, okay, here's what I need to work on, here's how I'm going to solve that problem, and to be able to add those people. And oftentimes, it's just a case of, whether it's the Twin Tower example, whether it's the Roger Bannister example, knowing that you can get it done, and then pursuing that with a passion and a perseverance that gets you to that goal line. You know, it's interesting when you think about Thomas Edison inventing the light bulb. I remember Napoleon Hill talking, who wrote Think and Grow Rich, thinking about and interviewing Thomas Edison. And when he did that, Thomas Edison explained that he had done, I think it was 10,000 experiments before he got the light bulb to work. And Napoleon Hill said, 10,000 experiments? Wow, didn't you think about giving up and quitting? And he said, no. He said, actually, the more times I failed, I thought, I know 10,000 things that don't work. I must be getting pretty close to a solution. Now, that's a totally different mindset than 10,000 times I've tried it and it doesn't work. Now, I don't know a lot of people that are going to try something 10,000 times. Edison was a pretty unique person in that regard. But it points out how important it is to understand what it is you want to accomplish, understand how real it is, and then get a plan and work it. That doesn't mean that you're not going to fail. That doesn't mean that you're not going to have to adjust your techniques and your plans. But if where you want to get to is solid, to actually continue to do it. Okay, so if you have any questions or comments or ideas for future episodes, please email bruce@brucewhipple.com. And if you're not already on our mailing list, head over to brucewhipple.com and sign up and grab any of the free reports. That'll put you on the mailing list. There is a lot of free information you can use to acquire already profitable businesses. This is Bruce Whipple. Thanks for listening to the Business Acquisition Podcast. And remember, you miss 100% of the opportunities you failed to take. And procrastination truly is the thief of time. So do something today, please. Your future self will be proud of you.